Good morning. For many of you, I certainly welcome you back that have been part of the Web Live A to Z cosmetic program, and for those that are new, we certainly welcome you here to this one session on photography. So dental photography for aesthetic treatment planning. And we're going to need to talk rather technical this morning. So I hope you got your coffee in you if it's early, or for those in the afternoon, if you need cappuccino, whatever it is, I hope that you're well fed. Because there is some technical information here that for those that are a little bit intimidated by computers, you might need to go back and study this a little bit more. I hate to say that, but it is a little technical, and sometimes that can be a little hard to follow along. But I will try to break it down as simply as we can for you. I do enjoy photography. I consider myself a semi-professional photographer, and so just a couple views there. Chesapeake Bay on the right, for those who are familiar with the Chesapeake Bay, and this is the Salt Flats, actually. The picture on the left is the Salt Flats in Salt Lake City during a sunset. So just kind of a couple just fun pictures to start off our presentation. And so, as you know, we will be talking about photography, and really what I'd like to talk about is share with you the 12 views for really accreditation. That's where we really like to talk about. I'm going to share with you a 13th view that I think is important to help have consistency. Have a system in your office where you can get predictability. Use this system to treatment plan. Use the system to communicate with your lab technician. Use the system to evaluate your own aesthetic dentistry, to make yourself a better dentist. And that's really, I think, very, very crucial. That's one of the most crucial aspects of photography, in my opinion. It's going to help you sell dentistry, but it's going to build your confidence, and certainly having confidence that you can meet, and I say many times exceed, your patient's expectations is a crucial part to having a successful cosmetic dental practice. For those that are just new on board here, just to give you a little bit of history to myself, I do run the UCLA Aesthetic Continuum here, and Dr. Jovanovic has very kindly allowed me to run this A to Z course. But my main emphasis truly is my private practice. I'm in private practice 4 days a week in Beverly Hills, so I'm in the trenches just like most all of you out there. So, and I always share with audiences, I'm only going to ask you to do things that I do in my own office. So I'm not going to ask you to jump through any hoops that I wouldn't try to jump through myself. Just a little background on myself. Private practice is 4 days a week, and I certainly do a lot of teaching in this forum and lectures around the country. So just a little background on me. We're going to talk mostly about digital photography, but I'm also going to talk about analog photography, slide film, because that's really where we all started from. As I started talking about having predictability, having the success that you're looking for in your aesthetic cases, how will photography help you do that? Our goal really is excellence and consistency. Certainly that's always our goal, is excellence and consistency. And certainly we want to accurately demonstrate our dentistry. Let's look here just for a second. This is an interesting case, I think. Let's just look, please concentrate on the slide on the left. There's the patient before. And after spending about maybe an hour and a half at most, we were able to accomplish the slide in the middle. So if you look at the slide in the middle, I've bonded direct composites. We had a session already on that. And so I bonded the diastema, closed the diastema, and also bonded the edge of tooth number 10. And the question is, are you happy with that result? Are you happy with that result? And I hope that through the courses, through Smile Design and such, and in your good eyes and such, you can see the issues here. And there is certainly an axial inclination issue, a problem with tooth number 9, or for our international colleagues, 2-1. And so if you look there, all I did though, and then so what I do in my office is when I do direct bonding, it's a 2-appointment procedure. So I go from here, the slide on the left, to here in about, as I said, about an hour and a half, probably this appointment. And then I take photographs. And the patient, it's already built into the fee that they're going to have a second appointment to come back and reevaluate this. And so if you look here though, and all I did between here, the center view, and the right view was added composite in this area here. That's all I did. And by adding composite in this area, here's the picture on the second appointment. So we developed this film in this case, all right? And so I knew when the patient came back, I knew that I had an axial inclination problem. And I think most of you would agree that if you did this, you spent an hour and a half staring at these two teeth, that you'd be quite pleased with this result. And I would be surprised, I'm sure there's some in the group that have very, very keen eyes, but it would be hard to pick up maybe this axial inclination problem just looking quickly. And so it is really with photography here they were able to see this issue. And so I have a plan. Next time when they come back, usually I schedule them for a half an hour on the return visit here. I know that I'm going to add a little bit of composite here. And that's really all I did to this case to correct the axial inclination. Now, I should say one other thing, though, as I kind of almost smirk here. You can't see me. I took the video off. But also, if you look here, though, if you look here, this is not taken at the correct horizontal. And we need to address that a little bit when we talk about photography, being careful to shoot at the correct horizontal. So we've corrected the horizontal position. If you look at the inner commissure line, it is slightly at an angle. All right. So, and if you look at the midline, it looks like it could be off here, but it's only because of the angle of the camera. And so as I take the correct angle and line up the inner commissure line with the horizon, right, then you can see the midline is perpendicular to that, which is what we want, and we have good axial inclination. So, point here with just these 3 slides is what can we accomplish? Why is photography? How does photography aid us in our quest to become better aesthetic dentists? And this is just a simple example, I think, of how in fact it can. So, really, what do we need to talk about this morning to try to get us up to speed in this digital era, really? So we're going to talk about the digital camera, obviously. We're going to talk about digital film, and then very briefly, not a big conversation about digital display, because that is really a whole other complete lecture to cover that. When it comes to display, we'll briefly talk about Photoshop. I'll just kind of show you one little quick example. Obviously, you need to have a computer to be able to do anything with digital presentations. And this would be a projector if, in fact, you were looking to be a presenter at some point. You also may, though, want to blow up your images large in your office in some cases. So that would be the other possibility there. But let's spend some time really on the digital camera. Or at least let's talk about digital camera selection. And what are you going to use to select your camera? And there really are 2 main criteria that I'd like you to think about, which is really, what is your objective? What is your objective with this camera? And what's your budget? And that's really kind of the reality of it. So what is your camera? With the camera, what is your objective and what is your budget? So when we look at the objective, very simply put, it is, what are you trying to achieve? Okay, what are we really trying to achieve with the digital camera? Are we looking to have nice photography? Okay, are we looking to have nice photography? Or are we looking to have film quality photography? That's really what the difference is. And so we'll have a group of cameras really that I would call the pro consumers that give you very nice photography. Okay, I don't know about very nice. I'm going to say, let me step back and say nice photography. And then if you want film quality photography, then we really need to go into the SLR camera. So we'll look at some of the camera systems out there. And then, what is your budget? I mean, certainly we are running a business. You need to have a budget. So is your budget basically $1,000 or is it $2,000 or $3,000? And that's going to limit as to what class you can get into also. So you need to kind of weigh, what are you trying to accomplish? Film quality photography or just really some nice photography, and how much money are you willing to spend? So with digital photography, the prosumer cameras are on the left here, a couple versions. We'll look more closely at them, and on the right are the SLRs. Let's look very specifically. Now this information, the next 5 or 6 slides, I really just got off of Photomed's website. So Photomed, you can look here, or you can look up here, Photomed, that's the spelling, so www.photomed.com. And they are a local company here in Los Angeles and do a very nice job with aiding dentists through their camera dilemmas. So they have loaners, they have rentals, they pretty much cover everything, and they got great technical support people. If you are having an issue with the camera, they can usually walk you through it right on the phone. So and just to make sure also that I ethically cover all things, I'm not being sponsored by anyone this morning, so I have certainly been affiliated with companies in the past, but for this lecture, I have no corporate sponsorship at all, so I'd like to always ethically state that. So this information, as I said, was from off Photomed's website. What I'd like you to look at is, this is the Olympus camera. I'm not even actually sure it's still, they may have a 5000 series. I'm not positive, actually. I put these slides together maybe 6 months ago, and they usually change about every 6 months. So this is a 4.1 megapixel camera. All right, so just to technically talk to you a little bit about megapixels, okay? So we're talking about pixels or dots of color. So there's 4.1 million of them on that this sensor can pick up. All right, so it's 4.1 million pixels, color dots that this camera can pick up. Now, that's, you know, people talk about 4 megapixel cameras. They talk about 6, they talk about 8, they talk about 14. Well, these are dots of color. What does that translate into image size? And this is where I told you I was going to get a little technical. So for a 4.1 megapixel, we have an 11.1 megabyte file size. Now that's kind of interesting because this media card that they sell this camera with only holds 16 megabytes. So it says 16 megabytes included. Well, that's 11 megabyte file size, 16 megabyte storage capability. That means you could really only get one full image in there. So probably for most of you this is review, and for some it may be a little bit complicated, so you might need to study this a little bit more. So I apologize about that, but hopefully that makes sense to you. So this many colored dots makes for a file size that's 11 megabytes large. All right, so that's really what we're talking about. This is just an average, very average camera in my opinion. We'll look at then the Canon G5, and now they've stepped it up to 5 megapixels. So 5 million color dots is what we're really capable with this camera. And now we're looking at 14.4 megabyte file size. So a million more dots of color, and the megabyte size, the file size, got a little bit larger. The only other thing I'd like to show you here is JPEGs and RAW, and we'll have to talk about those in a second. That's why I said this is a very technical lecture, and so unfortunately we have to get through this so you understand these different cameras and your different options. So now the G6, which is kind of interesting, why they call it a G6, and it has 7 megapixels because they kind of were in the G series. The G4 had 4 megapixels, the G5 had 5, and then they went to the G6, but they made it 7 megapixels. So okay, great. So we got a lot of dots of color, right? And now our storage size, our file size is 21 megabytes. All right. Okay, good. And again, JPEG and RAW capabilities, and we'll define those in just a couple minutes here. So those are the prosumer, if you will, cameras, okay? And these are for nice photography. So these three options really are nice photography, not film quality photography. Now we step into the category of film quality, really the SLR type cameras. And now we start getting into a class, well, we have a 6. If you take these two numbers, this is how the camera reads it. It's the sensor size across and down. We have, this has 6. If you multiply these two numbers, that will be 6 million, a little over that. 6.1 megapixels is what this camera can shoot. And it has about an 18 megabyte file size. That's full size image, JPEGs and RAW. This camera, the Canon Rebel, this is the 10D. The slimmed down version of the 10D. Personally, I would recommend you staying away from this because what I'm told on the inside is that this body, they did some other things to it. The only thing that they kind of tell us is that it's a lighter body. Now, admittedly, these cameras are heavy. These cameras are heavy, so it's difficult for our assistants sometimes to take this. I don't exactly know what the weight is, but they are heavy, and it is difficult for our assistants sometimes to hold these. So it is a little nicer to have a lighter camera, but there's some other mechanical stuff on the inside. I personally don't think it's as good as the 10D. If you're going to go this route, I would certainly recommend you go with the 10D cameras. Then here's their new one, the Canon 20D. Right? And this has 8 megapixels. Okay, so 8 megapixels. And now you're getting about 24 megabyte file size. All right, and so file storage, when we talk about memory and such, how quick this image will upload and such, this is really what this has to do with. Could you send a 24 megabyte image across the internet? And the answer is not. Well, you could, but you wouldn't want to because it would take quite a amount of time. So that's really the importance sometimes of file size also, is how much time is it going to take you to send this, maybe an image to your specialist. So these images need to be downsized. JPEG, RAW, this will shoot RAW and a JPEG. All right, so the 20D, this camera I like a lot. Actually, just to share with you, I actually have the Canon 10D looking to maybe upgrade to the 20D. What I'm really waiting for is what are they going to come up with next in this category of cameras. So the 20D, I know they're going to come out with a 40D sometime soon. I mean, I don't know that from the inside, but that's just classically what has occurred with these cameras. So this is a nice camera, though, if you're looking to get into the market. You don't have a camera, I would really highly recommend this 20D camera. And there's one other one that I would highly recommend. But look at the price tag over here, and I've kind of had this over here. I didn't really mention it, but it's about a $3,000 investment. So you need to be willing to spend about $3,000 on this investment. You know, I was thinking, I was at a Photoshop workshop this last weekend, and just, you know, I used to spend almost $400 a month. Well, actually, probably more than that. Somewhere between $400 and $600 a month is what I used to spend on film and processing in the analog days. So you can see $400 to $600 a month. You make this back up in a fair amount of, pretty quickly, really, 6, 7 months, something like that, and you've already paid for the camera system. So, and I shoot a lot more images today because it doesn't cost me anything to shoot the images. Not that I would worry that much about the film, but I just know that I probably shoot a couple more images today because it doesn't cost you anything. It's you just erase the CF card when you got your images in your computer and you move on. So, kind of something to think about when you look at it. You go, wow, $3,000 is a lot of money, but in relationship to maybe how much you're spending on film, it really isn't. And then you got the Fuji S2, good camera, getting up around 8 megapixels also. You know, again, about a $3,000 expense. You know, now you're looking at a 35 megabyte file, so it wouldn't even fit on a small card, a 32 megabyte CF card. It wouldn't even fit on there, one image. But a good camera, a little red bias. Not, you know, some people. It's interesting. Some people swear by this camera, and more people than I talk to, don't really like the Fuji as much as either your Nikon or your Canon. But some people that have it swear by it. So it's really a personal thing. The next class, this is the Canon D100, and you're going to hear a lot of people talk about this being really an excellent camera, and it is. It's a very nice camera. I tried this camera out, and I liked it. And I just happened to be a little bit more in the Canon class. I had some Canon lenses, so I really went with the 10D. But the Nikon D100 is really a very nice camera. And if you look here, this is a 6 megapixel camera also. And you can shoot JPEG and RAW. So 6 megapixel camera, nice camera. Now Nikon also came up with, and they've discontinued the D100. Now they're at the D70. All right, so the D70. So that's their latest version out there now, and it's these numbers I don't believe are correct, because I believe, and this is right off the Photomed website, but I'm pretty sure the D770 is a 8 megapixel camera. I'm pretty sure of that, but just double check, because I could be incorrect there. But I believe it's an 8 megapixel camera. It shoots JPEG and RAW, and again, we'll have to talk about what does that exactly mean, a JPEG and RAW. So if you look here, most of these cameras are putting anything that has 6 megapixels or greater. The image size at maximum resolution is right around 20 megabytes. Okay, so what you're making is roughly a 20 megabyte file size, so for storage and such. Just some information there. And then we really get into the professional digital cameras, and the Fuji S3 Pro. Certainly any one of these are nice. I actually just purchased the Mark II. This is, as I said, I'm kind of into the Canon family. This is a 16 megapixel camera. Wonderful. This is totally a professional camera. Wonderful camera. And I use this now because as I told you, I started out, I said I'm a semi-professional photographer, so mostly I use it for fun. I have brought it in the office to shoot some portraits. Some portrait photography, but that's really not what this course is about. It's really about trying to get consistency, trying to determine what camera system you want, what views are important to aid us through the process. So so just to kind of summarize just for a second, when you look at the camera types, again, I'd like you to think about what are you trying to accomplish? You're trying to accomplish nice photography or film quality photography. So if you like presenting, then you want to obviously have film quality photography, and you need to go into the SLR class. And I would say, you know, the D70, the Nikon, or the Canon 10D are really wonderful choices for you. certainly we all need to come up with a budget. So, you're talking about a minimum of $1,000 to get into a nice digital camera, and then up to about $3,000. So think about your budget, but also think about the long term, because you're going to save a lot of money on film, buying film, and the processing of film. It's very expensive. So those are really the two parameters I'd like you to think about on this now on the film. On the digital cameras. Then we go into flash attachment. So with all of the prosumer cameras here, the Canons or the Olympus, you have this diffuser that Photomet has come up with that allows us to do intraoral photography, or really more accurately macro photography with this, and put a flash on it. So this diffuser gets the light correct in our images. And it's, as they say here, quick release. But this is what you need, this flash attachment for the Canon G series, as you see here. All these images, as I said, just taken right off of Photomed's website. And then, so that's your flash option, really. There isn't one, if you will, for the prosumers. And then when you get into the semi-professional cameras, okay, your SLR cameras, now we're really looking at, we have several different options. And this is your classic ring flash. Problem with ring flashes is they're good, and they're necessary for macro photography. They tend to wash out our images, though. They tend to wash out our images because you get a tremendous amount of light that gets dumped on your subject at a very close up, and so you don't get many shadows. And so the difference really between this EM140EX and this SB29S, the main difference is this is a total ring flash, okay, and so the light is continuous around this ring, and this is a dual point flash. So you got a little separation of light, and so you got light coming in from both sides, and that gives you less flattening and more details, a little bit of shadowing. So that's really how this helps, and you can see the price difference, about $50 more, so not that significant. And then for the Canons, this pretty much is their ring flash. They might call it a dual point, but it's closer to a ring. Many of them have modeling lights on them, so that helps focusing. That's kind of a nice feature, and that was one of the other features of the prior difference also. And then you have this MT24EX. Here we can now we have really true dual point flashes. Okay, this gets snapped on. It's just a little knob here. This gets snapped on, attached to the end of the lens. That's how this works. But you could take off one of these. You could actually hold it in your hand if you'd like, or have an assistant hold it in their hand if you're doing portrait photography even. So you can hold it to the side when you're taking the picture, and so get a little different effect. But just keeping it this far away from your subject softens the picture nicely, adds a little bit of depth to the restoration and or to the subject matter. So you get a little shadowing and a little, really what we call depth. And a nicer, really, it's truly a nicer picture. You know, is it worth the cost difference? Yeah, it depends on really what you're planning on using these images for. I think if you're just using them for your own self-evaluation, and you don't plan on lecturing, you don't plan on putting huge pictures up in your office, you don't plan on putting, trying to put some gorgeous pictures on the internet, which I think you'd want to do with all this photography work as you grow and become better in this field. You might want to step into this at some point, but I'm not sure this is absolutely necessary if you're just beginning. I would probably go with, if you had Canon, go with this version here. Or you could, in fact, do this version also for the Canon. All right, so that would be probably my preference if you're doing a Canon. Nikon, this is kind of their standard flash for the Nikon. So that's the difference in the flash units. And then kind of what I would call the big daddy of them all, okay, really is this crazy concoction, all right? Pretty sophisticated, very sophisticated bracket system. So it's the same concept. You have two flash units here, but now you can move the flashes back and forth. So you can put the flash in front of the lens, or you can put the flash slightly behind the lens. You can put it closer to the lens. You could put it farther away from the lens. And all those variances will give you different effects, all right? Certainly photography is based on light, and so that will change the light that's put onto your subject. And so this really is what I would sort of call the big daddy of them all, okay? I forget exactly what this system goes for. It might be $1,000 or so. Certainly, you know, if you're really publishing and you're doing, you really want to blow up some beautiful images, this is a wonderful system. And I don't have this system yet, but I do plan on stepping up into this system myself. But I don't have it yet, so that's to be honest with you. So that kind of concludes, you know, a little, about a 30-minute segment on cameras and flashes. So what do you need to really know about the cameras that you're looking at? Are you looking for digital photo quality photography, or in fact is you're just looking at getting some nice photography, some good information to share with your ceramics, good information to share with a specialist and with your patients, all right? So think about that, include that in your budget also. How much do you want to spend on this project? And now let's take a moment and spend some time on digital film. All right, so obviously we know we're not sending film off into you know, Kodak or so anymore. So now we have really sensors. Excuse me. Now we have really sensors, and so we're really going to look at sensor size, sensor resolution, and histograms. All right, and that's really what we're going to speak about here is sensor size. And sensor size, if we look here, we have consumer, semi-professional, and then we have what really would be a film size sensor. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at very simply, I'll give you a reference for where I got these pictures in just a second. Actually, I can tell you what it is. It's dpreview.com. So if you're a photo buff or you're interested in photography, dpreview.com has some wonderful information on it. On photography. So these two images I took right off of their website, and I'll reference it later. So what do we have here, though? We have actually, this is a film negative here. Right? So this is a film negative, and this is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. And what do you think this little green dot here is? Okay. That's the film size, if you will. That's the sensor size for these consumer grade cameras. Okay? So green here, green here. So that is the sensor size of the consumer grade sensors, or cameras. Now, for the semi-professional, the SLR cameras we're looking at, we have blue. This is the size of the sensor, okay, for the semi-professional cameras. And then the white, all right, is the size, as I said, of a slide negative. So why do I show you this? Right? For most of you, you've probably put this all together then. So even though this may have 7.1 dots of colors, they're really, really, really small. And so what will it take? What would be the conversion to go from here to here? Well, to me, I'd say that's probably about at least a 5-time conversion, maybe, no, probably even 6 to 8-time conversion, actually, now I look a little more closely. So it could be 6 to 8-time conversion to go from here to here. So these dots, even though you have 7 million of them, you'd have to blow them up 6 to 8 times before you got to this size here. Right? So we have 7 million dots in here. So that's what pixelation is, when you take these small dots and you start blowing them up to here. So it would be less clear. Right? You'd have pixelization. You'd have a less clear object or photography. And the same difference between this size and this size. Right? So the semi-professionals are this size, okay? So semi-professional sensors are this size, and so maybe there is a 1.5 times difference between here and here. Okay, so you need to have, today pretty much most people agree that you need to have about 8 megapixels, okay, 8 megapixels to be film quality. So this sensor, most of them are at 6 to 8 right now. The 8 ones are very comfortable saying you really are at slide photography. But think about it, you need to take that 8 megapixels and still blow it up some. All right, so blow it up some, so the colors need to get blown up, all the color dots to be film size. So hope that made sense to you. So please don't get confused and fooled just because someone says it's a 7 megapixel sensor in it, okay, because it's really only this size, which means it really needs to blow up a tremendous amount to get to film, and significantly even to get to the semi-professional. So that's really sensor size, the difference there and the significance there. I hope that totally made sense to everyone. I'm sure it did. And then the sensor resolution, as I've been saying, we're talking about megapixels. Most camera classes today in this consumer dental grade are at least 5, and many of them are 6, and now 8's kind of becoming somewhat the standard, which is in fact film quality. I should say, slide quality. Most people consider at least 8 megapixels. And then really need, how many dots will fill that area. So that's what we've been talking about. Let's say a 6 megapixel camera has 8 million color dots that fill this area here, or 8 million or 6 million, whatever, depending on the lens, the camera and the sensor size in here. How far can you zoom in on an image while preserving perfect image quality? Or how far can you zoom out? How far can you blow this image up to get a nice, perfect quality image? So that's really what we're talking about here. How large the image file will be for storage, we talked about that. Most of these images in their full resolution were being stored at about 20 megabytes, okay, in their full resolution. So we'll distinguish the difference. And then how large a print you can make. That I'd like to just to talk just a second about, to do a little, share a little math. Basically you take the resolution and you divide it by 300. Now let me explain that to you for a second, because that's not going to make sense initially. So if you have, classically, your resolution for a 6 megapixel camera has 3,000 dots across and 2,000 dots down. So you basically divide that by 300, okay? So that would be 10 across and about 7 down. So what does that mean? That a 6 megapixel camera you can blow that image up to about 8 by 10, okay, and you'll get a reasonable image. So that's the conversion. I hope that made sense. So think about it again. I'll say it one more time. So a 6 megapixel camera, that means there's about 3,000 color dots across and there's about 2,000 dots down. All right, so if I show here 3,000 dots across and 2,000 dots down as I go on this slide analog over here, okay? And so if you divide this 3,000 by 300, that becomes 10, and you divide 200 down by 300, you get about 7. So, it would be a 10 by 7. Well, 8 by 10 is our classic image size. So you could, in fact, print a reasonable 8 by 10 color picture. So I hope that made sense there. So that's all I'm going to talk about really there as far as print quality. So just some numbers to think about. Ooh. Histograms. Okay, I guess my histogram, unfortunately, my images did not cross over here, so that's why I went back and forth twice. A histogram, I'll have to talk you through this. I don't think I have another picture of a histogram in here. Most of the cameras today actually show histograms. Histograms are the amount of colors in there from black to white. Black is on the left, white is on the right, and it has peaks to the colors. All right. So histograms, it's a box that comes up on the back of the camera. Most cameras today, certainly all the SLRs, have histogram capabilities. You have to go into and look, where do you find the histogram? But the left side of the histogram is black, the right side is white. And so you want to have peaks in this. You want to have contrast in your histogram, and you'd like it to be slightly to the left center of the box. And that's when you know you have perfect exposure. So when I take the first picture of my patients today, when I take the first picture of a certain magnification ratio, which we're going to talk about that in just a second. So let's say I'm taking a full face picture of someone, the magnification ratio would be 1 to 10. And when I take that image, I look at the histogram, and I look in this box, okay, is the histogram slightly to the right? Okay, my right, I'm going to my right. So is the histogram slightly to the peaks, slightly to the right of center? And if it is, then you have perfect exposure. If it's to the left of center, I'm doing my left, okay? If it's to the left of center, it's an overexposed picture. There's too much white in it. If it's more to the left, then there's too much black in it. So it's underexposed. And so then I'm going to go in, and you're either going to change your aperture, which we'll talk about, or you're going to change the flash, okay? And I would suggest also a manual flash. This lecture usually goes with a workshop, which it kind of works a little better to flow into a workshop. I wish we could all be together and do that. But I hope you're getting the information well in this venue. I think I love the internet lectures. I think they're kind of fun. It's a very different way for us to present. I've done probably at least a dozen of these now, probably a little more than that, maybe 15 or 20. Not as many as Sasha, as you well know. But it's interesting to talk to a digital, a little camera robot here and know that there's an audience out there that's listening. So it's an interesting world now that we live in, isn't it? I hope that you're, you know, relaxed in your jammies or whatever, you know, wherever you may be. I'm fully dressed here. I know that some web lectures don't do that, but I'm fully dressed. So if anyone had any questions. So think about that histogram, though. So when I take that 1 to 10 view, I look at the histogram. When I take the 1 to 2 magnification ratio view, I look at the histogram also. So the first picture I take, I look at the histogram. And is that, in that box, the histogram box, is the humps slightly to the left of center? Okay, that's really what I'm looking for. Then I know I have perfect exposure, and I'm not going to have an issue with this image. I'll be able to use this image. I'll be able to color correct it a little bit in Photoshop. And that's really what you're going to do to many of these images. I say you need to photo correct them just slightly, color enhance them in Photoshop, even if you're going to just send them to the lab, because the lab needs the best color information we can send them, especially if we're talking about aesthetic dentistry in the aesthetic zone. So in Photoshop, you would again bring up the histogram, and then we would look at something that's called levels. It's under image adjustment levels. So if you go into Photoshop, it's image adjustment levels, and that's the histogram. And you can move the histogram bar and change the exposure in the image. It's a wonderful thing. So you can take a dark image and make it lighter. You can make a light image and you can slightly change the contrast, make it slightly darker. And then there's something called unsharpened mask, and that's under filters in Photoshop, or in Photoshop it's under filters, sharpen, and then under sharpen, unsharpen mask. I believe that's how it flows. And so then you just play with the unsharpened mask, and that just kind of brings out the crispness. It separates the pixels a little bit, gives better definition to our images. So just a little bit, that was that little aside on the histogram as far as what we would do in Photoshop. So if you're at all a camera buff, this gentleman here does a wonderful job breaking things down into simple terms. This dpreview.com, wonderful website out there. For anyone who's a camera buff, anyone who wants more information along this regards. They do a wonderful job explaining histograms at great depths, exposure in the histograms, what the contrast you can get out of histograms, also the difference between many of the sensors out there. You know, is it a CCD sensor, is it a CMOS sensor? There used to be a lot of controversy between CCD and CMOS. They used to, almost like the occlusion wars out there. But pretty much today, most people agree that the CMOS sensor is just as good as the CCD sensor. There used to certainly, most people would agree that probably wasn't the case not that long ago. But certainly today, I think most people agree the CCD, the CMOS are all the same. And in fact, interestingly, Nikon in their professional camera went and put a CMOS chip in it. So any of the doubters out there that thought that the CCD chip was superior because Nikon had them in all their cameras, Canon classically had CMOS, now kind of believe that, well, maybe the CMOS isn't that much better because Nikon put in their D2X. They put in a CMOS sensor. So just a little side note for some of the people out there a little more advanced in this field. So JPEG, this is what it stands for, Joint Photographic Experts Group. So they're just a bunch of probably young kids, for what I say, punk kids, that are just computer wizards, that came up with this JPEG format. And here's the key word here, really. There's a lot of text here. Here's really what I want you to think about, though. It is the most commonly used digital image format. So certainly all the prosumer cameras, all the, the simple little cameras that you go on vacation with, you see out there, they all shoot JPEGs, all right? And this is not a bad image by any stretch either, so I hope that's not what I'm inferring, because I'm not that at all. It is just, it's a lossy format, meaning you're losing information. Okay, you're losing information. So there's a loss of image information. It's dumping away some of the pixels, okay, to make a smaller file size, to make for convenience, And what does it dump? If you look down here, the theory is it really compresses color more than detail, okay, or I see detail better than color. All right, so there's the theory there. And if you look the next line down, we're looking at, sorts of detail from fine to coarse, and our eyes see coarse detail better. So it dumps more fine detail. So that's really the theory. That's the, the behind the scenes information. But just think of a JPEG as a lossy format. You lose information. That's what allows it to become a smaller image file size, okay? Because we were talking about those 7 megapixels translates into a file size of roughly 20 megabytes. JPEG, though, you can get it down to less than 1 megabyte. Now you can store much more images on these CF cards. This is right off the website, the DP Review website, and I don't know how well this translates into the different monitors that we have out there, and maybe there are some groups that are in fact catching this broadcast in some type of lecture format, and so you may not have a good enough projector to be able to pick up the difference between something that's 100% quality JPEG, so maybe that something that's 10 megabytes or almost 20 megabytes here, to something that's dumped out 90% of the information. And certainly on a good monitor, you would be able to tell the difference. Most of the difference is in the detail, and it's on the borders, okay? So most of the time you'll see that degradation in those areas is really on the image edges, or what I call borders, okay, to images. So that's really a difference. You can see it's sort of fuzzy. There's not a good definition between this crayon edge. There's not a good definition on these black bands versus this. And like I said, you may not be able to tell that difference, but there's a tremendous difference, really, on my monitor here. A very significant difference as far as, especially when we're talking about, is this film quality or not? Certainly this is film quality. Certainly when you're taking still an 80% JPEG, that's film quality. 60% is probably pretty borderline. Probably pretty borderline if I would call that film quality. I would probably be not comfortable saying that. But if you read here, that this is sufficient certainly for websites and that kind of thing. So, this is all information though that you can, if you don't catch it all, you can go to DP Review. Also, I think that certainly the Global Institute does tape these, and they are available for purchase. The tapings of these broadcasts also. So here's the other category though. So we got JPEG, that's a lossy compression, so we're losing data, and then we have TIFFs. Okay, a TIFFs really is a lossless compression. Okay, so when we use the word compression, it's just making a smaller file size. All right, so it's making a file size. So when it's shot and you have 20 megabytes, it compresses it. It gets rid of some dots, some information, gets it down to maybe 1 megabyte. Well, it's a lossless compression. So maybe it's 20, and then a TIFF, maybe it can compress it to 12 or 15 or maybe even 10 a megabyte. So it's a lossless compression. You don't lose any data. Okay, so you still have the same image quality. That's really the key to TIFF, and that's why certainly I like TIFF images a lot, because you're not losing any data. But they're big file sizes again. They're pretty good sized file sizes. So this is a nice, not all cameras take TIFFs. There's the biggest problem. Many of them, as you saw, just took JPEGs and RAWs. All right, JPEGs and RAWs. So many of them you can't even take a TIFF file with. So you have to kind of look at that also. Would you like to have lossless compression? You don't want to lose any information here. So really to summarize the difference between JPEG and TIFF, as I said, TIFF is lossless compression. Okay, so really you're not losing any information. So no information is lost in this process, right off of DP Review. Right? JPEG, here's the key. I think this will make sense to you. If you read here, it's like taking a 10-page document, and you can compress it. You can, shorten it, summarize a 10-page document. You can shorten it to only 9 pages, if that's what you want to do. Or you can condense it, cliff notes, these kind of things, into a 1-page document. So that's what JPEG is doing. It's downsizing the file size. Okay, obviously it's throwing out a lot of information. Okay, and the next consideration you need to think about is you cannot get this information back. All right, so if you take a 10-page document, or a 10, let's just say, megabyte, all right, a JPEG image, and you compress it to 9 pages, or you compress it to 1, unless you save the 10-page JPEG, you're going to lose all that information. You cannot get it back. So I would certainly suggest saving all your images in one file. Okay, the original images you take from your camera, save them all in one file. These are the originals. and then create another file where you've compressed them and you can use them to send to the lab, go back and look at quickly, easily, these types of things. But always save your original JPEGs, always save any original TIFFs, and always save your original RAWs, okay, which we'll talk about in just a second. But that's really the key. Think about it, though. So you're taking a large file and you're downsizing it. You're throwing away a lot of information. What is that information? Well, it's some of the detail, it's some of the colors that we talked about earlier, but you cannot get it back once you throw it away. So save the originals. There's really, I think, the next biggest take-home message is save the originals, okay? TIFFs, you don't lose anything, so you're okay. You want to save the TIFF. So this is just kind of showing you some typical file sizes, and so an uncompressed TIFF, we've been talking about closer to 20, really, but they're putting it in at 14.1 off of this. And then uncompressed RAW is this. We'll talk about RAW in a second. Compressed TIFF, 6. So you can take a 14 megabyte file and you can compress it in TIFF and still be 6. All right, so you cut the file size in half. Really what we're just talking about, storage, okay? So storage size here, how big is our hard drives, and how quickly will this information be attainable? How quickly you send it across the internet. So these are still big file sizes, 6 megabytes to send across the internet. And then you can see what happens with a JPEG, 2.3, and we can compress it to only a 0.2. Okay, so 200 kilobytes, that's pretty small. I hope that helps you a little bit there, but that would be a low, very low image quality, as you can see here. Sufficient quality for websites, all right? Sufficient quality for a 4:6 print. Remember, use that 300 number roughly, all right? Remember, use that number. A raw image is in fact just that. It is raw, it is sort of naked, it is unprocessed information. So JPEGs and TIFFs are processed by the camera's software. So you could take a TIFF file which says it's lossless, doesn't lose any information from one camera, and a TIFF image from another camera, and those two would look different. Well, to be honest with you, if you took two RAWs, they would look actually different also. Right? But it is a raw, it is unprocessed. Okay, so the camera is not supposed to do anything to it. It is supposed to be pixel for pixel reproduction of that image, whatever you shot, pixel by pixel, raw information. So these are, classically pretty good size images. Here we have just some other information called a digital negative. As I said, it is kind of a naked. It is captured though pixel by pixel. You also get some metadata here. Well, most all of them come up with that. You're going to get a date, a resolution, f-stop, shutter speed. All this information is classically stored in all the images, so you know what camera you took it with and what the different settings were. This is a large file size. That's the downside of it, but it is unprocessed. So if you're really going to use these images, many of the cameras won't shoot TIFF. Right? So if you really want to do some publishing, okay, or if you really want to do some presentation, I would strongly recommend shooting RAW. They are large file sizes though, and again, you want to save those images as RAW. Then you need to go into, and they're very ugly. Let's make sure. Let me also share that with you. When you take a RAW image, so that you don't get, let's say you start shooting RAW images today, all right, you go back to your offices or tomorrow. Please understand, those images are raw. They are very ugly. All right? And so you really need to take those images into Photoshop and color correct them, as I talked about, where you go in and you adjust the levels on them, and then you do the unsharpen mask. And in that fashion, you adjust the levels or the curves. There's a couple other adjustments you can make when you really get into this, but mostly you're going to adjust the levels and the curves. Those are two functions under image adjustment. So again, in Photoshop, image adjustments, curves or levels, those two will enhance this image for you, and then you go into unsharpen mask. But that's what you need to do to a raw image. You would never be able to publish, show a raw image by itself. So it will take some manipulation in Adobe Photoshop, and you really want to have it in a Photoshop CS, okay? Because that will read, Photoshop CS reads all the raw file image types. All right? So that's really, hopefully that helps you with the difference between JPEG, TIFF, and RAW. So RAW, just as I said, pixel for pixel. TIFF, is a lossless compression, but it can be compressed, but you don't lose any data, and then JPEG where you lose data. So very technical stuff. I apologize. So these are 2 histograms. Okay, good. I'm glad you got to see these for those that are not familiar with the term histogram or have seen one. Most of the cameras today, even the consumer cameras, the Canon G5, G6s, and Kodaks and Olympics, pretty much they all now, you can pull up this JPEG. And if you look here, these histograms, this is what they look like on Photoshop. In your camera, all you would see is this box here. You wouldn't see any of the extra data. You wouldn't see all these options around here. You just see this hump. You see this hump here. All right? And if you look, that's a little bit to the left of center, center being right here. It's a little further to the left than ideally I'd like to see. All right? So we'd like this peak, this, and sort of this, to probably be just a little closer over to about here. So that's where ideally we'd like to have it. So if you shot this picture, you'd want to change your f-stop, okay, or you'd want to put a little more light on the subject. So you might bump up your flash, and we'll get to that when we look at modifying or calibrating your camera. Here, again, the same peak, same basic spot. This is the same patient, same day, same camera. Here's a 212 kilobyte image. Here's a 1.5 megabyte, so 7 times more information here. And you can see that it gives you some more colors. These are all the different colors as we go across. Black on the left, though, white on the right. And then if we take this image here, this is another image, different image than what we saw. Certainly if you looked at this, you'd go, well, that's underexposed, Brian. Come on, what's wrong with you? And I agree, right? But and the histogram tells us that. Okay, so this is the histogram of this image. So if you were doing this clinically, you go, oh, you'd want to add a little bit more light to this picture. So like I said, you'd maybe bump up your flash. Okay, the flash is if you're shooting in a manual mode, which I would recommend, a manual mode, you can just manually up it. They go, you know, from, sometimes you put it down to a half, you may put it up to 1:1. Okay, that's classically where you are. You're usually between a half, which is taking some light out. Sometimes I go to a quarter, though, on my 1:1 views. It's taking even more light out, half again, or you're at 1. So this is probably shot at a half. All right, so then I would push it at 1. And it would take this bar here, as it is, and it would shift it over here. And it would be a properly exposed image. But let's just say you didn't do that. You shot it here. You weren't paying attention. You didn't look at your histogram. You're in a hurry. No problem. That all happens to all of us. How do we manipulate it in Photoshop? And that's what I was talking to you about earlier when I didn't think I had this in there. If you look at the image on the left, this is under Adjustments Level. Okay, it's under Image, the top toolbar in Photoshop will say Image up here. Image, you go down to Adjustments, and then you go over to Levels. It's right about here, actually, on the screen. To be honest with you, I do it so much, I know exactly where it is. And then this would be enhancing it and getting the adjustments, getting that histogram in the right position, left to right. And then we go into Filter, Sharpen, Unsharpen Mask. So filter is on the top line again. It'd be on the top line up here, over about here. You go down to about Sharpen down here, and then you go down to about Unsharpen Mask. It's probably right about there on your screen, okay? I know that's kind of silly what I'm doing there, but anyways, Filter, Unsharpen Mask. So if you look at the difference between here and here, this looks a little soft as you look at this, okay? Looks a little soft, and in fact, probably hard for you to tell. Like right now, you know, she has a little bit of peach fuzz, if I can say that, this patient here, and it's not easy to see, which maybe is a little kinder for the patient. And now, as you unsharpen and mask it, the peach fuzz becomes a little more obvious. If you can't see that on your monitor or your screen, you might also look at the flashback points, the reflective surfaces here. You can see these are much more pronounced here versus here. So that's the difference between just adjustments, trying to get the proper exposure here, and then unsharpen mask. A nice thing to do in Photoshop. This isn't a Photoshop program, but I want to at least kind of just share with you what can be done in Photoshop. So let's just do this one little thing, which is just a couple little options. Certainly we have mirrors. In my office, I like this Buckle 2 mirror. is the one I use probably the most. I use this for buccal views, and I also use it for quadrant occlusal views. So if I want to get a nice quadrant occlusal view, this is a great mirror for me. And then you need to have a couple different sizes, certainly, of the adult mirrors. So I have probably multiple of these and multiple of these. These are glass mirrors. They need to be really stored and cared for properly, because they do scratch very easily, and there's nothing more annoying than having a scratch in your image, especially if you're looking at publishing or presenting. I never like to see scratches in there. And that kind of goes, then I should actually talk to you just for one quick second about, is that cheating when you go in and you take out a scratch on a film. And we had a discussion actually at this conference that I was at over the weekend, this past weekend, and most of the people in the room, not everyone, but most of the people in the room felt that that was probably cheating. And I think it is myself. That's my personal bias towards that. Is I don't have a problem with you going in and color enhancing them, so going into levels and doing what we call global modification. So globally playing with the histogram, so playing with the levels, playing with the curves, adjusting the levels, adjusting the curves, and also unsharpen mask, okay? Those are global things. But to go in and spot, take out a spot or take out a scratch, I personally think that's borderlines on being unethical. Not that I want to be the dental police, so I'm not going to say it is unethical, but I think we do need to come up with what is the standard there, and the profession has not done that yet. My bias is, though, not to take any of those scratches out, and so all these images here and all my presentations, they have just been color enhanced and unsharpened mask, no spot editing done. This black background is really kind of a nice little thing to give you this effect, so it gives you better contrast, allows some of the incisal edge effects to pop out and be able to be a little more visible. Then you have, certainly you need lip retractors. These are the ones that I prefer. Certainly these are okay. I can tell you Frank swears by these, so try different ones. These are just a little bit big sometimes, but they do a wonderful job retracting. These are probably not as quite patient-friendly. These are just a little bit more patient-friendly. Put these in your own mouth sometimes, and you'll find they're not really that comfortable. These here, I would strongly not recommend you using these. These are maybe wonderful if you want to, do some bonding or something, maybe for isolation and getting the lips away. But I find for photography, they don't quite spread the lips as far necessarily as we want them to, and these are not as nice here in the middle for photography. So now we're going to kind of spend the rest of our session really on technique. The hard part with slide film in the old days, if you will, is that you wouldn't know that till you got the film back. So you shot the picture, maybe you had the f-stop set wrong, or maybe you had the flash set inappropriately, and you get the film back and it's like, oh, geez, it's overexposed. What a bummer. And you really couldn't do anything with an overexposed slide. It was, you were just stuck. And so today, as I said with that histogram, that really prevents you should eliminate all your exposure problems right up front. You just know right away, you take the picture, you look at the histogram, and you know if that those peaks are slightly left of center, you got a perfect exposure, and move on. Just keep taking what other additional images you're looking at that magnification ratio. So really kind of a win-win situation. And then you don't have the cost of film, so you don't mind taking an extra shot or two, view or two. And then depth of field. Certainly, I hope you can get the sense here. When we look here, these premolars are fuzzy. Okay, they're out of focus. These premolars are not. And so what did we do differently between taking these two shots to get these in focus and these not? That's really what we're going to talk about. That's really what depth of field is. Let's just look at, and these are really older slides, if you will, but they're still applicable. I don't know who's still in the slide realm out there, but the bodies are all the same. It doesn't, they're very similar if you're doing slides or if you're doing digital. Obviously, digital has the, computer components in it to be able to capture the images on a sensor and such, but the bodies are very, very similar in this world of cameras, be it even digital or analog. The lenses are similar, all right? Here's where they're macro lenses, and here's where the question was putting an extension tube was one of the questions. I have never done that, and certainly that would give us, give you a closer up image. I'm not sure I'd want to do that because I think that's going to change some other parameters in the camera. So I haven't tried that, to be honest with you, as far as that one chat question. So I don't know the honest answer to that. I was speculating when I gave that answer, sort of. So. But here's really, getting back to this lecture, magnification ratio. here's what we're doing here. So we're spinning the lens until this bar here lines up. So this is a 1:2 magnification ratio. All right, we take many of our images at 1:2 magnification ratio. And so here, this is just an example. This is the Xruc Dental i3, and it says a 1:10. This is 1:2, and this is 1:1. These are our magnification ratios, the three most common magnification ratios that I would recommend, the AACD recommends using. Now, if you're doing digital and you're using an SLR camera, there is, because of the difference in sensor size to slide analog size, there is a ratio that occurs. Remember now, when we looked at that sensor size versus the slide, there was a difference. And so in a 1:2 view that you take, okay, using a digital camera, you actually will set it to 1:3. Okay? Let me say that again. In a digital camera, when I'm going to go through here and I'm going to say I want you to shoot this at a magnification ratio of 1:2, I'm really talking about slide or analog film. I'm not talking about digital. Digital, when I say 1:2, what I'm really meaning is 1:3 because of the conversion difference between the sensor size and slide film. A 1:1 is set in slide, that's correct. In digital, it's 1:1.5. So you need to look in the little window on top of the camera. And so if I'm suggesting you to take certain images at 1:1 on your digital, which probably most of you people are going to venture into if you're not there already, you'll put it to 1:1.5. So spin your lens to 1:1.5 for this image, and then a 1:2 is a 1:3. Okay, so I want to make sure that's really clear. 1:10, unfortunately, when you get up into 10s and 12s and 15s, you'd want to set it to 1:15. Right? There usually isn't a 1:15 in there. So really what do you want to do is look at what we want as composition in the photograph, and I'll show what do you want in a 1:10 view. When we take a 1:10 view, it's a full face image, and so there's certain parameters though that I'll go through very specifically, and look through your camera. Okay, and when you see that average, because some people have bigger heads and some people have shorter heads, but on average, when you see where that 1:10 is on your lens, just put a small mark on the lens. You know, don't scratch it really heavily, but just put a small mark so that when you're taking a full face picture of the next patient, you can just spin it to that very lightly scribed mark on your lens, and then you know you're at a 1:10 view, and it's consistent. So all your 1:10s, all your pre-ops or post-ops, all your full face views will look very, very similar. All right? And so here's the key, is when you're doing a full face view, 1:10, we're this far away from the patient. And we get a little closer for the 1:2s, okay? And the 1:1s, we get even closer. Now, I've been shooting photography, just to give you a little example, I've been shooting clinical photography and dentistry since 1987 or so. I didn't have a camera back then. I was just out of dental school I was 4 years out of dental school, but I didn't have a camera. I was an associate in some different offices, but one of the offices I was in had a nice Nikon, medical Nikon camera. It was a beautiful camera, and with a 100 macro lens or 105 macro lens, it was wonderful, and I used to have fun shooting with his camera. And then I got into the world of this Xruc camera probably in 1990 or 91. So if you notice, the patient is laying back in the chair. And what I think you'll find is many times as we just begin, this is a hard way to shoot the pictures. All right? But if you notice, the front of this camera is certainly parallel to the patient's face. All right? But this is hard to do. I would recommend, if you're just beginning in clinical dental photography, to have the patient seat straight up so you can shoot straight at them, and then you'll have less angulation issues. So I want to be really clear, even though I show the patient seated back, that's because I've been doing this for a long time. Let me show you what I show here, though, very interestingly. I have the AACD photo guide right here open. Okay? It's not that I need to use it anymore, but I would suggest certainly that as you get started, just put the book over here and make sure you know exactly what parameters you want. The AACD has a wonderful photo guidebook. I don't know, they do sell it. I'm not sure what they sell it for. It's very nominal fee. I always give out the AACD number. It's 1-800-543 9220. So the AACD is 1-800-543-9220. I would certainly recommend anyone who is not a member of that academy to join. It's a wonderful academy. They have a great annual meeting. I'm actually co-chair, like I need another job, as my wife says, but I am co-chair of the San Diego meeting in 2006. It's going to be a great meeting, actually. Sasha's going to be on that meeting doing a nice presentation there. Dr. McLaren here from UCLA is going to be on. We have the Monnier brothers from USC. We have multiple wonderful ceramic dental teams. It's really going to be a high-powered meeting, so you may want to go look on the website as it'll start being advertised and such. The website is www.aacd.com. So anyways, enough about the AACD. Let's get back to our fun pictures here. So in the slide film, if you're still using this kind of camera, you just spin the lens out and it says 1:1. And now what we're looking at is the aperture or the f-stop, the aperture or the f-stop. And 1:1, the camera's already preloaded to say you shoot it at 32 or 22 f-stop. A 1:2, it says shoot it at 16 or 22 f-stop. A 1:10, it's preset, they're saying to shoot it at 5.6. And they're probably very, very close, but we're going to talk about calibration. So here we are just spinning the lens in and out. So we've spun it to get the 1:10 here, the full face, and then the 1:1 all the way out. And now for the f-stop, this little ring here is the f-stop. That's on slides. Classically, you had a ring here. So this is saying that f-stop is 16. This lens goes from a 2.5 to a 32. On the digital cameras today, most of them are, the f-stop is right up here on a little knob that you spin, and you'll see a big number inside there for the f-stop. That's where it actually is. We'll see a picture of something similar to where it is. So the camera says f-stop. If you're shooting at 1:1, you should spin it to 32 or 22. So this is right now at 5.6. That we wouldn't want. I think I show it set correctly. Okay. Here, we have the full face, and it says 5.6, and now I've moved it to 5.6. So now we're ready to shoot. Now here's the relationship that I want you to see, which is the smaller the f-stop, the smaller the depth of field. Okay, so we shot at f-stop for this image. The smaller the f-stop, the smaller the depth of field. Again, just a little bit of technical portion of the program. So what do we mean by that? The front teeth are in focus, but as we start going back, it's less in focus. Okay, so it's less in focus back here. So that's what we mean by a smaller depth of field. And then if we look here, larger f-stop, larger depth of field. So we shoot this image at 32, and now we can see the crown margin almost back here where it's kind of ugly. Okay, it doesn't look like a very nice crown. So that's what we mean by larger and smaller f-stop. Let's look at, though, there's another relationship that you need to understand, which is the larger the f-stop, I shared with you already, the larger the depth of field, but the smaller the aperture. The aperture is a little window, shutter if you will, a little window inside the lens. And it's going to allow a small aperture, means a small opening, less light that gets in there. So very little light, we'll just say. And then a larger aperture, more light. How's that translate into photography? Well, let's look here. I put these little codes here. So we shot this at f32. So if you look, f32, it's a larger f-stop. So we have a larger depth of field. Look at everything is nicely in focus. Smaller f-stop, smaller depth of field. Think this is the same patient, okay? Same day, okay? So smaller depth of field. Everything's, you can't see the molars in the back there. You can hardly see them. And look at how nicely defined they are here. So larger f-stop, larger depth of field. Smaller aperture though. Okay? So this is less exposed. Not as much light hitting this, so it's darker. Smaller f-stop, smaller depth of field, larger aperture, more light, so this is slightly overexposed. That's how f-stop plays into what will be in focus, but then you have to relate that to how much light do you want on the image. Right? So you have to be a little bit careful there. just some numbers there. PhotoMed, I talked to you about a wonderful resource there. Washington Scientific's another nice resource for us. Lester Dine I should have on here also, and you can find them on the web. No problem finding up Lester Dine, Lesterdine, Lester Dine. And certainly I just like this picture of chiclets. You know, is that what we're trying to create in aesthetic dentistry? And we talk about shooting a calibration roll, using this little slip of paper here and be able to cut out, make up your own, so you can know what f-stops definitely the pictures were taken at. And this is exposure compensation, which we'll get to in just 1 second. Here's the window I was talking to you about, that on the digital cameras, this is where your f-stop will show up. All right, will be right here. Well, it's in different places on different cameras, but it usually shows up on the top line here in the AV mode, aperture priority mode. So you'll see your f-stop, and there's a little knob pretty much right here. You'll spin, and you'll be able to change your f-stop. And you'll want to remember those key numbers. The f-stops for full faces are smaller, usually a 5.6 to 8, something like that. And then the 1 to 2s is usually 22 at a minimum, 27 to 32 really are the f-stops for the 1 to 2s and the 1 to 1s. Now, though, we really can fine-tune it if we want. So now it's getting a little more technical. All right, so we get an f-stop like we talked about based on a magnification ratio, what we want in view. Now if we want to fine-tune it, then we use exposure control or exposure compensation is what we're using. And so here's it's set at 0, and here we have a minus 2.3. So a little less light is what we're talking about. We're talking about fractions now, fractionizing the aperture, basically making it slightly smaller, not as a full turn on the f-stop, but a partial turn of an f-stop. So calibration is going to help us with consistency. You do need to be aware of the ambient light. Do you want your overhead light on? And the answer is really no. You don't want to really have your overhead light on. And that's why many of the lights today have modeling lights on them. This is my main operatory. It's not quite this bland anymore. We've livened it up a little bit more. But this is my main operatory, and you can see the photographs on the wall. You can see a television on the wall. So we play TV a lot. We have a flat screen in here now. This was taken quite some time ago. And we play TV sometimes. Sometimes we'll put images up. Many times we'll put their images up. I do most of my consultations in my private office because I think it's a little more soothing, less, people don't like the operatories. But, you know, these pictures here I think really help sell dentistry because they go, wow, I like what you did to this lady. Oh, I like what you did to this guy. You know, or maybe these pictures aren't up anymore either. We have all new pictures. We cycle them every so often. But, you know, it's the prize wall, if you will. Tell patients a lot of patients will say they don't want their pictures on the wall. And so I usually say, well, you know, I do my best work for the patients that let me put their picture on the wall. And they usually then scratch their head and go, oh, well, maybe I'll let you, maybe I'll let you do that then. All right, so think about it. You know, it's a lot of this is, you know, verbal skills also. And I do like to always throw in a couple practice management tips. Because that's important. You know, no matter how good you are, if your patients don't know how good you are, then you're not going to have maybe as a successful practice as you would like. Here's how we walk through calibration. Right? And I'm going to tell you this is less critical today since we have histograms to go with on the back of the camera. But it's still a nice exercise to do. All right, but I'm going to repeat that, though. It is less critical to calibrate your camera today. Less critical. Okay, I'm not saying don't do it, because I think it's a wonderful thing still to do. But it's less critical now that we have a histogram on the back of the camera. So you can always tell, and that's what I do every time when I take a picture on a new patient, new room, new day, whatever it may be. I look at the histogram quickly. It's usually right, but usually it's not good enough. So maybe it's correct 80% of the time. 20% of the time I have to go in and modify it to get it the proper exposure. Right? So calibrating will get you closer, you know, probably get you 90+% of the time you'll get it correct by calibrating. So what are you doing? You're shooting the different images at different f-stops. So this one I shot at 32 and this one at f5.6. And this, remember the concept. The larger the f-stop, larger the depth of field. Everything's in focus, smaller aperture, so it's not as bright. Those would be guidelines. But here we are shooting at f11, f8, and just looking at them, do you like the exposure is what we're doing in the calibration. Which exposure do you like the best? And then f16 and f22, which exposure do you like the best? All right? And so, you know, really it's really between these two, the f22 or the f16, I think is the best exposure. okay, on this 1:2 view with this camera. This is the Yashica Dental i3 with this film, okay, because film plays into this also. And so here we're shooting the 1:10 view at different f-stops. So larger f-stop, the picture on the left, larger depth of field. Well, if you notice, interestingly, the background is in focus here. You can see the crease. You can see the crease in the background. Okay, this is just some felt cloth. There's a crease in it. So larger aperture, larger depth of field, so more stuff in view. Okay? Smaller aperture, so it's slightly underexposed. Or maybe that's a good exposure, but slightly underexposed. Then smaller f-stop, smaller depth of field. You cannot see the creases back here now. Okay, and slightly overexposed, larger aperture. So at the 1:10, you can see, as we talked about, you want the f-stops to be lower, 5.6 maybe f8. Again, we're trying to calibrate the camera. And then once you decide which once you decide what f-stop you like, then you can fine-tune it with exposure compensation. Okay, so this is how so like I said, we like the f16. We told you, remember, we like the f16 and we like the f22 in this view. Now we're going to put in a little exposure compensation. Here's none, and here's minus 1.3. You can see that it's darker. +3, -3. So slightly lighter, slightly darker. +2/3, -2/3, slightly darker, slightly lighter on the left, slightly darker on the right. So we're getting too far away from the correct values. A lot brighter as we open up the exposure compensation, and darker. Now we run the same at f22, 0 and -1.3. +1/3, -1/3. We're looking at which one do we like has the best compensation, the best exposure. Okay, this should say a plus. This is plus 0.7, you can see because it's slightly overexposed. -0.7, slightly underexposed. +1, -1. I hope you get the concept. So we ran it first with f-stops, okay, and once we get the two f-stops that we like, choose between those two, then we do it with exposure compensation and try to determine which is the best. Actually, to be honest with you, in the Yashica Dental i camera, you could either shoot at f16 or f22. You always would rather pick a larger f-stop if it's still going to be acceptable, because then you have a larger depth of field. So there's really the key. And then if we look here at the, now what we're doing is we're exposure compensating on the Yashica. All the Yashica had was a 0, a +1, or a -1. So here's 0, there's +1, given a little bit more light, and there's -1. So I think really, honestly, the 0 was where you wanted to put it. You didn't need to adjust the exposure compensation. Really on any of these, I think it showed that they all look pretty good. So in the AACD, some of the things they say is do not artificially enhance the slide. So be careful trying to overexpose things to mask discrepancies. And really, these all come from the accreditation process. So that's all these are really in regards to is the accreditation process with the AACD. In-printing can be distracting. I personally like in-printing. It's one of the things I don't actually like about digital, is because now in the slides I would always put the imprint on, because I could then tell you this is the composite in 1975. I'm making that date up. This is the composite in 1990. This is it in 1995. This is what it looks like in year 2000, or veneers or implants, whatever you may do. It had the date right on the slide, and you didn't have to remember how old they were, and the audience didn't just have to trust you, which I know our audiences trust us as public speakers, but I just like to have the dates there. I think it's a little cleaner. And be careful. Obviously you want to take the pre-ops before the post-ops. Don't forget those pre-ops. Using consistent film or processing, that's really a key if you're still in the film world. Use a nice Kodachrome film or Ektachrome. Really is really at 100 speed. Film is really kind of still the standard. Most of you probably aren't in film anymore. Overexposure shouldn't be an issue, because you're going to look at your histogram. You're going to look at your histogram. If you're in the film world, you're still there, then go ahead and calibrate your cameras, and then you won't have an issue with that. Today, actually, in Photoshop, you can take X-rays, and there's really two nice ways. You can just grayscale the X-ray, and that will color correct it. So you don't need to, in the film world, best to put a magenta, shoot these with this magenta, this special filter. The FLD filter would really give it a nice, it wouldn't make it look so blue, or just put the X-ray right into a film carrier, slide carrier like this. That was actually the best way to do it if you had a double film. And then this is something that I kind of created. You saw that PhotoMed took it to the next level where I showed you that black background. But I always, I like disposable things, especially if they're cheap. And so you can go to a hardware store, not a hardware store, an art store, excuse me, hardware store. You might be able to find it at a hardware store, but an art store, and just get this sort of crepe paper and cut this out. This isn't real thick, but it's fairly stiff. And we just cut it out for the palate right here. And this is how it looks in the patient's mouth, and then this would be how it looks when I shot it. So just a piece of cardboard, we throw it away when we're done. I've actually taken the same example and used foam, black foam. So that's the level that I'm at now in the office. I actually cut out foam and put foam in there as black foam, again from an art store. How would we use photography in the office? As you saw, we have these kind of displays in several of the rooms and the hallways. We have a little book that patients can look at if they like. Certainly you go out and buy a book, and I think it's a good place to start. If you're not good at photography yet, use someone else's book, use someone else's pictures, and as you develop your skills in this area, then you insert your pictures, take theirs out and insert yours in. We have little cardboard things that we used to put them in. Sometimes we have them in little frames that we have pictures, tooth that has an old amalgam in it and it's got some crack lines, and then putting an onlay in it. So just a couple different ways to market, and really, usually, in an interactive group, I say, well, what are you doing here? What interests you in photography? And usually we hear most of these answers. Certainly, diagnosis usually is the first thing that I usually hear. Patient education, certainly from a practice management standpoint, for case presentations, and then really, to me, a big thing is lab communication. And also, it's really self-evaluation. I learn something from every case I do. I've never done the perfect case. We just keep learning more and more and better ways of doing things. So that's really what it helps us with. These are, for accreditation, one of the objectives I share with you is to be able to take the 12 views. So we like to do the 12 views, and we really start off with the first is a full face view. Then we do, as I said, the 1 to 2, center, right and left, smiling, and then a 1 to 2 retracted. Center, right and left, and then a 1 to 1 view, center, right and left. So those are magnification ratios. The full face is at 1 to 10. And then we go to the occlusal views, and those are shot at 1 to 2 also. So that's how it comes up with the 12 views here. There are the 12 views spelled out. We're going to go through each one, so I'm not going to read all these. That would be horribly boring. But if you see, the full face is the 1 to 10 view, and then we go into 1 to 2s, okay? As I said, the full smile, frontal, right and left, full smile, and then retracted 1 to 2s, front, right, left, and then 1 to 1s the same. So let's look at them. Obviously, we don't want to have, in the slide world, is handling thumbprints on them. I'll tell you a little story. When I send my slides, when I used to send slides, today I send a CD with the images burned on it. Okay, that's what I really do. But in the days I used to send the slides, I would actually like it when the slides came back with some type of thumbprint on it. Okay, as you know what I mean? So I know that the ceramist at least looked at them. All right, they looked at them, they took them out of the sleeve, they really looked at them, they got their thumbprint on it. So that tells me they looked at them. Otherwise, I don't even know if they looked at them. They just more junk in the box, they didn't get to it, whatever. But anyways, you be careful how you handle them and how you develop it. Certainly you don't want to have blood, saliva, impression material in the teeth, especially if you're planning on showing these to patients like before and afters. They don't like impression material, these types of things. We're used to looking at that stuff between teeth, but they're not. Certainly appropriate focus, appropriate exposure, the appropriate depth of field, really crucial. Be careful with the distracting backgrounds. You can see the psychedelic background behind me. No, it's a very, very nice background here in Sasha's office. He lets me in it every once in a while, only if I'm good. Over underexposed, flash problems. We talked about, a little bit how to adjust the flash. Film problems, most of us probably aren't going to be worried about film in improper magnification ratio. So let's look at, this is a mock complex bonding I did for the continuum that I run here at UCLA. So it was kind of a mock little process that we did. So that criteria basically in the full face images, we'd like to have the patient's nose basically center the picture. So honestly, this picture on the left is okay. The picture on the right is probably better. All right, we're just a little closer. You don't really want to see the shoulders, but we really like the nose to split the X and Y plane pretty well. A nice smile, nice pleasant smile. Have the patient standing in what we call a natural horizontal head position. And what I always share with audiences is most women, when you take a picture of them, they will tip their head slightly to, I got to put the video on me for this. So the women, when you take a picture of them classically, they will classically do this. Okay, this is what they'll do. And I'm not making this up, and I have to go over and go, no, no, give me your full head. And men, though, will do this. Okay, they'll put their nose up in the air. I don't know what that's all about. And I have to go over and put their, no, give me. But you want them to kind of just relax their shoulders and look straight forward. Now, the camera's sitting at a funny angle at me, so I know it's shooting a little bit up at me, so I won't be able to demonstrate it exactly, won't be able to exactly, but kind of just have them shrug their shoulders a little bit. Try to look straight forward. Again, women tend to do this, just upright their head a little bit, and men do this and just tip them down. So real important that you have their natural horizontal head position, because you want to build their occlusal plane. You want to build their occlusal plane to the horizon. Right? And that may not line up with the eyes, it may not line up with the earlobes, these other landmarks, might not line up with Frankfurt's plane, which are all good landmarks and good guidelines, but I would rather see you line it up with the natural horizontal head position. I think that's the most reproducible guide for us. So full face, no shoulders, top of the head, unless they got some buffoon, whatever you call that, hairdo, the head's hair over here, but basically the top of the head. Certainly want to see the chin closer to the bottom, nose in the center of the picture. That's your classic 1 to 10, okay? It's your classic 1 to 10 full face view. Then as far as the 1 to 2 frontal view, that's really what the second view, the full smile, 1 to 2 magnification ratio, frontal view. What do we like to see? We like to see the commissures, okay, bilaterally, lined up. Well, we'll see. They may have some facial asymmetry. So you wouldn't necessarily, when you look at this view, line up the lower border, the frame, with this inner commissure line, because that may not be true. They may have, like my wife, has slight lip asymmetry. Her lip goes up a little higher on one side, and many people's do. All right, so this patient has pretty good lip symmetry. You can see a little bit of difference on the bottom here, though. If you look closely, there's a slight difference down over here, but the upper lip is pretty symmetrical. So don't just line up the commissures. Look at having their head in a natural horizontal head position, and you need to, as I said, if they're sitting up straight, you need to shoot straight at them, and then you'll get the relationship, and then that's the only way you'll know if your midline is on correct. So you don't always just line the midline up here either, because their midline could be canted, and you'd want to know that before you start. All right? That would be good information, I think, that we'd all want to know. So be very careful with this view here, not to try to correct things for the patient. Shoot it, have them in their natural horizontal head position, and you shooting parallel with the horizon. There's really the key. All right, so have them seated up, excuse me, have them seated up and shoot as best you can parallel to the horizon. And so we don't want to mask midline discrepancies, we don't want to mask occlusal cant discrepancies, and or lip asymmetries, just so we know, because we'll do some things slightly different when we see that also. The 1 to 2 right lateral smile, okay, so nice smile. We like the lateral to split the X and Y plane. You're going to hear me say that on almost every view now. When we go to the lateral views, the lateral will split the X and Y plane. The way I teach it is if there was a diastema between the lateral and the canine, or the lateral and the central, you should be able to see between it. You should be able to see between that diastema. That's how parallel we want to shoot between that. We'd like to obviously see the full commissure lip, not too much distraction over here. And we go to the left side, same thing, the lateral splitting the X and Y plane, pretty close. Not too much distraction over here. And also, you'd like to shoot it, again, perpendicular to the horizon. Don't necessarily line up their posterior teeth with the horizon, because it may not be the case. They may have a huge, I'm exaggerating, but they could have this huge occlusal plane, incisal plane discrepancy. They could. So don't try to line those up. Just try to get them perpendicular to the horizon, and that will really help, or parallel to the horizon, this view, and that will really help. Again, looking for consistency here to be able to diagnose, number one, okay, to help communicate with the ceramist. So when you try things in, maybe there's some issues. You want to be able to communicate that back to the ceramist, any issues that you may have. And then also self-evaluation at the end. What could you have maybe done better next time? NT is what I call it, next time. What could I have done better next time? In the fifth view, the 1 to 2, again, these are all 1 to 2s. We're looking at the lips retracted. And we like to have the teeth separated. That's really the key. So some slight separation of the teeth and the lips well retracted here. We want to see the gingival, because obviously you want to be able to correct the pink aesthetic issues in this case. What I've done here is I've bonded the incisal edge and of tooth number 9, or for our international colleagues, 2-1. And if you look here, you can see the flash point here is towards the distal. And that's very peculiar. The flash point doesn't belong on the distal of central incisor. The flash point here, this reflective surface, if you caught my bonding lecture, I talk about it tremendously in bonding, because that's how we tell if we have the contours correct. I can tell by just this picture here that this lateral is kicked out. The distal aspect is kicked facially, okay? The distal aspect is inclined or kicked out facially, because the reflective surface should be on the mesial transition line angle. That's where it belongs, as you see here, and as you see on the laterals. It's on the mesial transition line angle and on the cuspids, all right? And now, look, when I corrected it, the flash packs are about the same. And there's the key. When you do bonding, veneers, the flashbacks, they don't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but they should have a lot of similarities, okay? They don't need mirror images, but some certainly similarities. So now view number 6, the retracted right side, teeth separated, the lateral splitting the X and Y plane. Again, really trying to get consistency in your photographs so you'll be able to diagnose all your cases based on a consistent system in your office. That's what I like to teach to, or systems that we create in offices for consistency, really, for reproducibility. Same view from the left side, teeth separated, nice retraction. Try to retract a little further. You'd certainly like to at least see the first molar. So on the view on the left, I put distracting background here. Well, you can see her fingernails. She's holding the retractors, so that we'd rather not see. Probably more important than that, as far as I'm concerned, is I'd like to see a little more retraction. So I usually tell them, release this one a little bit. Don't take it out of their mouth, but let go of it a little bit. Let's pull a little harder to this side. And you can see, now we're back to the first molar in the after view. So that's good retraction there. This is a better view than this one over here on the left, all right? And then view number 8, now we get into the 1 to 1. This should really say, this is 1 to 2 here. This is actually incorrect, okay? This is incorrect, I apologize. So it should say 1 to 1. You don't want to see any opposing teeth. This is where that little black background that I had, that I showed you. You can use a cardboard or use the one that Photomed sells that you put up in the palate, the roof of the mouth, and that does block out any tongue or any opposing teeth there. So those are ways of blocking out the opposing arch. But if you shoot straight at it, you usually won't get the lower teeth. So you can see in this example, no reason for me to shoot them all perfect, because if I did that, it wouldn't be a good exercise. You wouldn't learn anything. So we don't want to see the opposing teeth here. Ideally, I like to see the incisal edge in the lower half of the slide film. So, you know, between here and here, the lower half. You can see I'm in slightly in the lower half. I'd probably like, ideally, this to be just a little lower, but that's not that crucial. Just as long as you can see gum, okay, the gingival tissue, then we're okay, all right? So here you can see the bonding, corrected it. Not the best bonding, this was quite some time ago. Become a better bonder. This is 1997, these pictures were taken in. I think it's an adequate bonding job, but nothing, certainly today I would do it a lot better and a little bit differently. But looking at the lateral views, as I've mentioned several times, the lateral will split the X and Y plane. Now I like the position of this incisal edge. I like this. It's in maybe the lower third line, if you will, okay? It splits it into lower third. So I like that position. If there were diastemas, if there was any diastemas between the lateral and the adjacent teeth, you'd be able to see right between those. So that's the angle that I like to shoot this at. The lateral splits the X and Y plane, and certainly the lower half, closer to the lower third, is where I'd like the incisal plane. 1 to 1, now I have it correct here, 1 to 1 magnification ratio, close up view. And the left side, you can see she almost has diastemas here, and I'm shooting right through those. Would rather not see the opposing arch, okay? So would rather not see the opposing arch, and you can see on both views we can see the opposing arch. The other thing is, if you can see the lingual cusp of the premolars in either the 1 to 1 view, or more importantly, in the 1 to 2 retracted view, then you're shooting up. So, unless they have a rotated tooth or so. But classically, if you see the lingual cusp, you're probably shooting up. So just another little point that I didn't catch there. Now when we look at the last two views, 11 and 12, really are occlusal views. And so we'd like to get at least back to the first molar. These pictures I was taking by myself This is almost impossible to do by yourself. I mean, it's almost. I won't say it's impossible, but it's certainly nice to have an assistant there. Classically, what happens when you do this view is the mirror fogs up. So it's nice if the patient holds the retractors, and I usually ask them, in all the views, I have them holding the retractors out and up. So they're holding the handles parallel to the horizon, okay? And they're pulling out, forward with the retractors and out. Okay, so out and up, forward and out. That's really forward and up, basically, okay? You want to get the lips as far away from the teeth as you can. So the patient, in all the views, okay, and the patient's holding the retractors here. Now the assistant is holding the mirror and blowing air on the mirror to prevent this from being foggy. There's a couple other options you have to prevent fogged mirrors. One, you can have a hot water bath. You can put the mirror in a hot water bath. Some people also have just hot heating pads that get the mirrors basically room temperature, or body temperature, I should say, and then they won't fog. So those are other ways that you can prevent the mirrors from fogging and be able to do these views by yourself. Some people like to shoot these seated up, the occlusal views. Some people like to shoot them sitting back, lying back down. I personally do them lying back down, but it's whatever your personal preference is. I don't think there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's whatever is easier for you to be able to manipulate, hold the camera, and get the proper view. That's all I care about, and that's all you should really care about. This is a better view. Let me just go back here 1 second. Here's the key to this view, though. Okay, we're really trying to diagnose this facial surface and the arch form. So you don't want to have the lip, okay, on the teeth. And I want to be able to see the facial embrasures. There's really the key to this view. You can see the lip is slightly on the teeth here. We don't really want to see up the patient's nose. We don't really want to see their eyelids. Okay, that's all nice, but she's a very pretty gal, but that's beside the point. Okay, we'd like to get this lip off of the teeth. All right, so this is a little bit in more than I'd like, even though you can still see the facial form. I'd like to actually see the facial embrasure, excuse me. I'd also, talking about facial form though, I'd like to be able to see this facial triangle here, the facial triangle. And I like to see all of the facial triangles as best we can. Obviously, if there are teeth that are kicked out, we won't be able to see that. But in our final evaluation, let's say we restore these teeth with 6 veneers, let's just say, you can see about the same amount of this facial plane as you can here. And that, to me, is a nice result. And the same here. You see about the same of this facial plane as you do the lateral over here. So that's how I'm going to go back and evaluate, self-evaluate my work. And that's why the photography really needs to be consistent. So now we're a little bit too far over the patient, and so we can see the whole facial plane. That's not really what we're looking for. So neither one of these are great. They're certainly, I would still call them acceptable, especially if you're shooting these by yourself. You're getting back to the first molar. You like to at least see the first molars. All right. Ideally, I'd like to see a little of the second molar, but you got to see, you want to see these facial embrasures because that's really going to help you in a diagnosis and through treatment. I had several slides in here that show some errors in the pictures, but let's at least look at this one. We have one at least here. Most of the errors were, one was like a fog mirror, just to give you an idea. So one of the images that I showed incorrectly in this example really was just like a fog mirror. So obviously you can't diagnose from that, so that's incorrect. Some of the other ones were, not getting that incisal plane or the occlusal plane, the posterior, being canted. Okay, so that was an issue. One of the other pictures that I showed in here for the trying to do a little technique criteria, are you being consistent? The teeth were together in the retracted 1 to 2 views. So in the retracted views, we want the teeth to be separated. Okay, so we can see some of the incisal edge effects. So that's one of the other errors. In the anterior view, I really, like one of them, I don't really have, it's not quite a 1-to-1, it's not really a 1-to-2, it's in between the two. So make sure, like in the 1-to-1 frontal view, you're only going to see centrals and laterals mostly and a little bit of the cuspid. That's kind of a pure, if you will, 1-to-1 magnification ratio composition. That's the composition we like to show in the slide. So that's what I was trying to do in that last section. The 12 views is show you proper composition. And as I mentioned, let's say your camera, you're shooting digital, you can just lightly scribe the lens. Just lightly scribe the lens a little bit for consistency again, so you know exactly where to spin the lens to for a 1-to-10 view. Because that one you will find is not well marked on the camera. You won't find a 1-to-15 on the digitals. Certainly the slide films, you will see a 1-to-10 for most of them, so you'll be able to go right to that point. Really be consistent. Are you shooting right at the patient? Are you reproducing their mouth in the face really in space, if you will, just like we do with like an aesthetically adjusted face bow transfer. That's giving the ceramist information as to where is the midline, what's the occlusal cant in relationship to the horizon. Well, that's what these photographs are going to help us with also, because we need to determine, do we need to change the midline, do we need to correct the occlusal cant? So these photographs are crucial for diagnosis, all right? Very, very crucial for diagnosis. So this picture here, if we look at this one example that I have, which is what is incorrect about this view. What view is this? Okay, I'm sure you all know this is the one that this is supposed to be the 1 to 10 view. Well, that isn't 1 to 10. We have too much of her. So as we said, we really only want to see maybe a little bit of the neck, really none of the shoulder, no shoulder, and we want to see the top of the head and the nose to split the X and Y plane. That's classically the 1 to 10 view. You can see, it's hard to see here, but we do have slightly distracting background here. This is slightly a distracting background. So you would want to change your f-stop. Remember, make the f-stop smaller. So if we made the f-stop probably closer to 5.6 in general, that will lower the f-stop, lower the depth of fields. That would make this out of focus, make this fuzzy, so we wouldn't be able to see this distracting background. All right, so that's the concept there. But then all you have to remember the relationship between f-stop and aperture. Okay. Now the good news is most of this. The good news is the physics behind most of this has been already worked out for all of us. The camera manufacturers have done it for us. They know that we're not going to be physics majors and be able to figure out light optics and lens optics. So, as I said, the key points that I think I'd like to take home message, one, I'd like you to think about shooting consistently. So I showed you the 12 views, the 12 AACD views. I think the 13th is what we call the relaxed lip position, or the M position, or the repose position. And that is really where you have the patients lick their lips. Okay, that's the relaxed lip position, where they just put their lips together and then they part them. That helps you determine how much tooth is exposed at rest, and as you all know from smile design lectures that you've heard, 1 to 3 millimeters is how much we would like to show. So certainly we want to show a little bit of tooth on pretty much almost every age group. It certainly gives them a little bit more youthful appearance. Key take-home message, again, consistency, the 12 views, add that 13th view. Okay, I think that's really crucial, the relaxed lip position. Shoot them consistently. If you haven't been taking them, start taking on every patient these 12, these 13 views. Right? Show them to your patients. They may have no idea what their teeth look like. Most of them do not. You can show them, you can either print them out if you're using slides if you like, or even if you're shooting digitally, you can still print them out if you like. I think that's a nice way for them to be able to touch them. Other people just shoot them on a computer screen in PowerPoint or so. Some of these need to be color enhanced, as we talked about. Please look at your histogram. Please, when you shoot these pictures digitally, look at the histogram on the back of the lens, excuse me, the back of the camera body, and make sure that you have the right exposure, because that's going to be the key. Start out with a proper, we actually, all weekend we spent on Photoshop and PowerPoint. We always got, this last weekend, as I was mentioning, was a course put on by James Cowherd. I don't know if you've heard this young gentleman. He's a very, very bright man, does some wonderful work with digital presentations. His company's called AVS. He's located out of Vegas. And we had really a room full of wonderful colleagues. Taraj is here online with us this morning. He was there also. And we all said the same thing, which we all got back to. The simplest way to keep your life simple is to take a properly exposed picture right out of the gate. So that's really why you're here, is I hope that what I've been able to do this morning is share with you, some ideas about what camera system you might want to have, okay? That's where we started off with, really. And then thinking about storage size, these types of things, really the proper exposure, proper depth of field, and proper composition. The A to Z course is for cosmetic dentistry. I believe this is our last session. But I would keep your eye on the website. We'll probably start up this A to Z course again in the fall, would be my guess. We don't have any dates yet, but Sasha and I are working on those. So hope you have enjoyed this. For me, it's been a fun 10 or 11 sessions, and I will be here to answer some questions, so we can sort of start the chat on the question box there, okay? Are digital images accepted in international journal publications? I don't know the answer to that, but I would have to say, you're very welcome. I'd have to say yes, all right, but that's not honestly, I don't know is the truthful answer. I really don't know, but most of these are major publication houses. Most of them would actually prefer a digital format because it's so easy for them to take the image and just put it in the publication. Otherwise, they have to take your slides and they have to scan them themselves and they have to digitize them, and that's a lot more work for them. So I can't imagine, I can't think of a scenario where they would not want a digital image. I just can't think of one. Certainly they want a good film quality image is what they're going to want from you. But other than that, can't see any reason why they wouldn't want that. Is there any indication to standardize the way to take pictures in order to compare small changes between two different times? That's a great question. Okay, and that's really what I was trying to address when I talk about using magnification ratios. So if you're taking before and afters of a patient and the full face, if you shoot it at 1 to 10, the full face magnification ratio, you're going to have a pretty consistent picture. I mean, if you try to superimpose both images over each other, will they superimpose perfectly? No. Okay, but they'll be very, very close. Very, very close. If you scribed your lens, okay, if you scribed your lens, then it'd be pretty darn close. And so that was the point of the magnification ratio part. And that's why the AACD developed that system. Really 1 to 10 full face, and then 1 to 2 is what you're going to use mostly, because that's you're going to look at your clinical slides, okay, and you're going to shoot 1 to 2 views, and those views will really allow you to compare, be it pre-op, be it intraoperative, or the case. Intraoperative is the best word for lab communication and such. If you shoot it at 1 to 2 again, maybe with shade tabs in there, they'll be able to get a view of the whole dentition, in that nice view of it consistently. And then your after pictures, taking them also at the 1 to 2. That's what's nice about this magnification ratio, using those numbers, the 1 to 10, the 1 to 2, and the 1 to 1, is you will generally get very, very good reproducibility. Not perfectly, like you could line them up on top of each other exactly, but close enough for us to be able to really make a diagnosis and improve really our patient care, really. And that's really what the self-evaluation comments were at the beginning and middle, and certainly here at the end. Isn't that what we're really, photography is going to aid us with, is our treatment planning, make us better diagnosticians, okay? From an aesthetic standpoint, certainly we need articulators and these types of things, study models, but from an aesthetic standpoint, you need digital photography to make a proper diagnosis. And then intraoperatively, communication with the lab, absolutely essential, and then self-evaluation at the end. Do you manipulate images to show possibilities to patients? So I'll answer the second one first, really. So where do you buy contrast or set devices? I assume you're talking about this black background that I was talking about. I assume that's what you're talking about. That, as I said, just the one that's Photomed makes the one that's metal that you can sterilize between patients, so that's one that works very well. And then the other one that I showed you is just really, go to an art store and either get some type of very thick, like crate paper, kind of cardboard, black, cut it out so it has a little palette in it like you saw, or I actually use a little foamy, black foamy substance material. Again, it was bought in an art store by my staff. I didn't happen to go in that art store and get it, but I know that they got them in the art store, and we just cut a little palette in it so they can kind of bite on it in that retracted view. So you can make your own, as I said, and just throw them away, or you can buy the standard ones from Photomed. Do you manipulate images to show possibilities of patients? And that's a great question. I used to, would be my first answer, all right? Interestingly, as your practice evolves, patients start hearing about you. My practice, I've kind of been very lucky that I've kind of established a niche in my community, and people kind of know to come to me for what really most of us would consider high-end aesthetics. Now, I've been in Beverly Hills for 15 years. It took me 15 years to get to that point. So it's a slow journey. Right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But it was through really photography and letting people see what I was doing, the transformations that I was doing, that now patients kind of come in and they know, it almost gets to the point where they kind of come in, and I always feel kind of uncomfortable saying this, but it really does come down to the point of how much, almost are just sitting there going, okay, Brian, how much is this going to cost me? Okay, they already know that I'm the dentist they want to do the care because they've seen my work. They've seen, their friend, their husband, their wife, their girlfriend, whatever it may be, that I've done this, smile makeover on. And really now they know they want to do it. Is really, can they afford it right now? Or are they going to need to wait 6 months or a year to come up with the money to do it, whatever it may be? Or do we need to do it in phases for them? So that's kind of the good news in my practice. So I don't do a lot of imaging today, even though I like Photoshop a lot, that actually I'm starting to do a little bit of imaging just for sort of the fun for me, for partially, because Photoshop's a whole nother world out there. I started out initially doing a lot of image, well, not a lot, but a fair amount of imaging, like with ViperSoft, these types of packages, all right? And then I kind of got away from it because I didn't really maybe need to sell the case, all right? And today, doing it almost just because it's kind of fun and also to see, can I do what I've sort of promised the patient? You better put a disclaimer though, because I've seen a lot of people try to oversell what they could do, all right? And so you got to be very, very careful there. That's the one warning I would tell you about the imaging packages, like, buying, the Hornbook images or the LVI images or the Lauren Berlin image library. There's three of the big ones that I can think of. I'm sure there's other ones. And just plopping these teeth in the lips, I think is very dangerous. So you got to be careful. Can you really reproduce that for the patient? Well, I think that I will sign off then. Please, if you have any other questions, just email me. That's no problem. So please email me. You have the email address, brian@cosmetic-dentistry.com is my email address. So brian@cosmetic-dentistry.com. As always, it's great to be here on the internet with you at the Global Institute for Dental Education. Thank you. Have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you in cyberspace soon. Bye now.